Hello, welcome to Conversion Dialogues. I'm your host, Xavier Bonilla. This week I have on the podcast Bo Winegard. Bo Winegard is a former assistant professor of psychology. He holds a PhD in social psychology with concentration interest in evolutionary psychology. And at present, he spends a lot of his time writing pieces on conservatism and ways in which that can be used at present and in the future. In this episode, we talk about a variety of things. We talk about some of his experiences in academia. We talk about intellectual honesty and within academia and at large. We talk about conservatism and kind of his writing on it and his understanding of conservatism at the moment. We talk about the most recent U.S. presidential election. We talk about Trumpism, wokeism a little bit, and some of the more kind of current trends in our society. And then we end with a conversation about immigration and nationalism and a healthy cultural identity. Bo is a wonderful guy. I greatly enjoyed this conversation. We had a little bit of a small technical issue at the end here, so it cuts off a little abruptly, but we got all the good stuff, and I can't wait to have him back on the podcast in the future to keep having these types of conversations and other ones. So without further delay, I bring you Bo Winegard. I'm here with the brilliant Bo Winegard. How's it going, sir?
I don't think I deserve that, but it's going well.
It's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
it's really great honor. So why don't we just start with just give us like a very brief bio. A lot of people know you. A lot of people don't know you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and what your interests are and what they currently are and where you're kind of headed.
So I started in literary studies, which was my first sort of passion. And then I exited literary studies because it was too political for my taste. Little did I know, and I would discover later that much of psychology was as well. So I exited literary studies, but still love literature, and ended up through a circuitous path finding my way in psychology. Mostly evolutionary psychology, I guess, is what I like. Pursued social psychology technically as my degree, but I was really doing evolutionary psychology. So I got a PhD from Florida State under the tutelage of the very awesome Roy Baumeister. And then I got a job in a small college in Marietta, Ohio. I guess you can guess the college name. And then after 2 years, I got fired for various things that maybe we can discuss later, or maybe we don't have to, whatever. But, mostly I write some about human variation in IQ people get perturbed about, I guess, conservatism, nationalism, etc. Some things that rub some progressives the wrong way.
Yeah.
And now what am I doing? I'm vaguely surviving off of Patreon and working on a book on conservatism and human nature and why conservatism, the sort of philosophical and temperamental conservatism, is more congruent with what we know about human nature than is, say, progressivism.
That's great. Yeah, I definitely want to get into conservatism a lot. I do want to, avoid kind of that, not third rail, but I know you've talked a lot about your experience and everything, but maybe just for folks that don't know, give us the 2-minute elevator speech version of it, of kind of what happened and why and all of that. You can just give like a very concise.
Yeah, I mean, the very concise thing is that I was interested in human variation since, say, 2010, but I didn't really write about it until like 2014 or 15. And I wrote a couple articles about it that were peer reviewed, and then I wrote a couple for Quillette. Probably hurt me on the job market because I seemed to perform less well than I think my CV would indicate. I can't prove that, obviously.
Sure.
But I did obviously eventually find a job, but I continued to talk about and write about things that were, I guess, taboo in academia. And following a speech that I gave at the University of Alabama, which is certainly the last time they'll invite me there. And it was an unpleasant experience. Following that, the newspaper there wrote an article about it. It was a speech about human variation. The newspaper wrote an article about it, and then somebody found it, some pseudonymous person, and sent that to my university. I had a talking with my university. I thought everything was kind of okay after the first meetings with my superiors, but then somebody started sending them emails again in December-ish or so, linking all my articles and making mendacious accusations about whatever my views, etc. And then I had another meeting, really thought everything was okay after that too, to tell you the truth. And then I was told I was fired, I don't know, about 2 months after that. So I don't know exactly what happened. I think my understanding is that it was superiors were making these decisions. So it wasn't co-workers or colleagues who were complaining. I'm not saying they all endorsed my views or anything,
Sure.
but they weren't complaining about my performance. This was something that probably happened from the president down, from what I can tell, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard you tell your story before in different platforms and conversations, and it's always, I mean, it's I guess more commonplace now, unfortunately, but it just always strikes me as bizarre. It's just, I mean, every time I hear it, I'm just like that really happened. It's so wild.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like the day that they told, the moment that I was told, I wish I had like a video recording of my face when they told me.
Yeah.
Because it was such like shock and disappointment and sadness all at once, just this kind of soul crushing experience. You know, and I have some people who have said, oh, well, you're just doing this like right-wing grift or whatever. And I'm like, dude, look, I would way rather have a job, believe me. First of all, I love teaching. Is like really one of the most enjoyable things for me, to get up in front of a class for an hour or 2 hours and teach. But also, it's a stable job. I mean, like you have insurance, you don't have to worry about things, you know exactly what your paycheck's going to be. So I really wish I had my job still. It still sucks that I don't have it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've had not quite the same, but I've had my own, personal experiences within psychology. You know, I do clinical psychology as well, and some big failures. Some big, very bureaucratic, diplomatic kinds of ways of being let go or whatever. And when it's something that it's your passion, or it's a type of, it's your life, it's your passion, it's the things that you enjoy doing, and that's kind of ripped from you for nefarious reasons or else, that's, it leaves a void. That's really tough.
It's a good way to put it, right? Because it's not just, I've seen people debating this about cancel culture. It's not just a job. It's your passion. It's the thing that you spent. I mean, I literally spent, I don't know, 10 years of my life developing the skills to do that, along with a heck of a lot of money, and I don't have like another path. I got a PhD in psychology. That's 7 years in a PhD program to become a professor. So yeah, you're taking a lot more than just a job. You're taking somebody's passion and their ability to do what it is they invested, a good, like, for me, 1/4 of my life at least, attempting to achieve.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no real alternative that you can kind of put, just kind of replace with that. And you're absolutely right. It is the, it's partly the identity, but it's also all of the, you're trying to develop a very specific skill set for at least a decade. Right. And, to have that not there, the irony is within a field that's supposed to be, you know, the helping profession, you're trying to understand human behavior. You know, it's very, you know, it's again, the best way I can think about it is it just kind of rips a big part of you out, and that's it's really challenging. It's really challenging.
Yes, by the way, not to mention that it's also academia it prides itself on critical thinking and openness and challenging ideas and dogmas, etc. Like that's the whole supposed point.
Yeah, and right, and that's the piece of it that is, I think, the most concerning is if there's a space or if there's enough spaces where that's not happening anymore, that's a big problem. If you can't engage with, you know, a whole menu of ideas, you know, that's a problem for academia, and then that bleeds out into, I think, society and how, you know, we do science or how we do critical thinking or anything else. And so I think that is deeply troubling.
Absolutely, because some people probably think this about me, but actually I'm not a free speech absolutist in the sense that I understand that you know, people regulate speech in various ways, informally, formally. I'm a strong believer in the First Amendment and in you know what that entails, but I don't think that every magazine outlet needs to run particular articles, right? But in academia, it's supposed to be sequestered from political pressure, and it's the place where you can experiment with ideas that are potentially dangerous and potentially wrong, right? That's the point of academia, or at least one of the points of it, as professed by the universities themselves, right? So it is really bad when that function, that sort of protection that you get from the political ramifications of certain ideas or whatever, when that disappears, that's troubling not just for the universities, but also for the culture more broadly.
Yeah, I had you've probably seen you know, some of my references, you know, through certain tweets or some of my writing that, you know, I'm a big fan of Heidegger's thought. And
we'll have to debate that.
We'll have to debate Heidegger. But you know, one of the courses I teach is, you know, doctoral students is existential humanistic theory and therapy, and you know, I'd say probably a fourth of the class, or maybe a half of the class, is, you know, pretty heavy on philosophy, and that kind of stuff, whether you use that therapy or not in clinical practice, is you know, based off of philosophical thought from existentialism and phenomenology. So there's a good bit of Heidegger's thought, you know, taught in the class. And I can remember one semester I was teaching it, and you know, I had being in time, and I just kind of passed it around to students to look at it, and you know, I'm going on my spiel or whatever, and this one student, you know, raises his hand and says, you know, it says here in the preface or introduction or whatever that he was a member of the Nazi Party. And I said, yes, that's correct. And you know, everyone kind of, I mean, it got very tense in the classroom. And I said, okay, you know, and why are you bringing this up? It's like, well, Nazis are bad people. And I said, yes, Nazi Party was terrible. And then I had to take probably a good 20 to 30 minutes explaining how certainly, you know, him being affiliated with the Nazi Party is messy and difficult and complicated with for a lot of people. But I think if you're trying to look at the thought that he was trying to promote, which he did, you know, there's none of the, you know, eugenics, there's none of, you know, all this, you know, crazy nonsense. You know, he's doing ontology. And so, you know, it was fine. You know, class was fine. We moved on, and you know, I didn't get any weird emails from administration afterwards, so I guess it was fine. But you know, I felt it a little bit. I said, "Oh, this is."
I could see it. It's you have to somehow give a person can have interesting thought, and make really stupid political judgments. So another example is Carl Schmitt, the political theorist, who was also a Nazi. And in his case, it's a little bit worse because, you know, he was promoting illiberal Nazism in a way that Heidegger wasn't, at least in his thought. Right. But yet a lot of his thinking is interesting, right? So Schmitt, like, it resonates with me, advocates original sin, not sort of metaphysical, religious original sin, but this idea of the fallenness of humans, which I guess Heidegger does a little bit too, right?
But you know, there's peppered in there.
Okay, yeah. So there's interesting thought there that we can separate from, but that's one of those guilt by association things that we have problems with now. And it's like, look, like Jean-Paul Sartre was a huge Heidegger fan, and he was an anti-Nazi. Now, he was stupid the other direction because he basically, you know, flirted with the communist parties. And I mean, it's complicated, but you know, and that's, it's just troubling that we don't, as a matter of course, understand that we can do these things in classes instead of, like, I think people would be shocked, given my Twitter feed, to witness my classes and how uncontroversial I am. I mean, I'm certainly, like, you know, I try to talk, I talk some about political bias and stuff, but I mean, I don't think you would be able to, you would have no clue what my politics were if you came into my classroom, just no idea at all. And I take that seriously, but so anyway, I'll stop whining about this.
No, it's okay. I think it's important in terms of, you know, in general, I think in society, we have to have, you know, good, healthy dialogue about the exchange of very different ideas. And if they're terrible ideas, then okay, fine. And if there's some bits, okay, then we can take some truth, and maybe some are, you know, better than others. I think that the training ground is in academia, is in classrooms. And if that's not happening, that is going to be, you know, I think much worse for us in society and how we try and do things.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. That's what I would say too. So,
okay, we have probably two big items that we've kind of selected to jump in here. I am mindful of the hour in terms of the current election and all the stuff going on. So maybe we can save some time to, you know, kind of do, you know, not a full autopsy on it. Obviously, there's a lot of things to unpack, and but I think that is kind of the practical or pragmatic pieces of, you know, kind of some of the things we can address. So I'll try and be mindful of some time for that. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, Bo's written a few pieces, you know, on Medium, and I think Quillette as well, but I think mostly Medium on conservatism.
Yeah, that was, I guess, Arc Digital.
Yeah, there's that
did
one
publish the one, but and then some of the other ones were just on the Medium blog.
Yeah. So that's what I want to ask you about the most. So I guess for you, there is usually, for some people, a, you know, kind of a bad taste in their mouth when they hear conservative, right? For some people.
Yes.
And for other people, it's, you know, business as usual. And so I guess in your mind, you kind of give me a general overview of sorts and how you understand or how you look at conservatism.
Yeah. So I understand that bitter taste, by the way, because I remember as, you know, as a 19, 20-year-old who was flossing my teeth on Chomsky and other progressives and radicals, I thought, you know, Thomas Paine or whatever, I thought I was not a fan of conservatism. I was attracted to T.S. Eliot's poetry, and he was a conservative or some kind of conservative. And then I found Edmund Burke. And even when I was not a conservative, nor even really attracted to conservatism at the time, I did find Burke compelling. And he was such a good writer that he was always engaging, even when I disagreed with him. So anyway, the point is, though, I understand the bad taste. I get it. But here's what conservatism is. as I see it, it's the belief that we have a duty both to the past and to the future in some sense. So we should revere the past, and we have a duty to the future to preserve and pass on the institutions that we have, the norms and institutions that we have that have worked so well to create a country that right now is one of the, the famous sort of Obama statement about, other people have made it as well. If you had to choose anywhere to live at any time in history, it might be a Scandinavian country, but the United States would be up there in the 20th, 21st century, especially if you were gay or something, it'd be the 21st century. And I agree with that. And that means that we've done a lot of things right in the West, and that we should revere our institutions. We should protect them, and we should promote passing them on with incremental improvements. I think that's the thing that often gets lost. We need to distinguish conservatism from reactionary, right? A reactionary is somebody who wants to go backward, right? Who thinks that we've kind of deviated from the correct path. And maybe I do in some ways that we could discuss, but conservatives are not afraid of change. Conservatives just want it to be judicious and temperate, so that it doesn't cause a violent revolution. Because if you look at revolutions, for example, they're utterly ruinous to anything we would care about. They're ruinous to wealth. People get killed. Generally, what replaces the older order isn't appealing either. So conservatives are very afraid of especially like reason-based revolutions, communism, this kind of idea that's based on abstract reason that doesn't take the institutions seriously and tries to overthrow them and replace them with some kind of utopian system. That is the conservatives' great nightmare. So that's how I view conservatism. Now, there are other features of it, such as respect for hierarchy and understanding that conflict is, it's an ineradicable feature of human existence, and that what we have to do is deal with that. Anti-utopianism, promoting family connections and localism in communities, and understanding that the sort of abstract view of humanity as the greatest good is flawed and can never happen, because we're not designed to think that way, really, and we probably shouldn't even promote it. We should promote caring more about people who are closer to us. That doesn't mean we should hate people, obviously, who are outside of that group. Or I'm a nationalist is another thing I think conservatism would lead toward. That doesn't mean I think we should invade Canada, but it does mean, and maybe we can debate this, or it's an interesting conversation to have, it does mean that I actually think we should care more about Americans than other people. And I do. I care more about somebody in Montana than I do about somebody in Canada. I just do, because they're fellow citizens. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want to invade Canada and take all of their resources, whatever those happen to be, but I do care more about people who are citizens of the United States.
Yeah, no, I most of what you said I agree with. I guess to provide a point of sort of devil's advocate here is most people, and I guess I don't know if this is more of a worldview conceptual difference, or if this just becomes more in the political apparatus of things, but most people will say, well, conservatives are these, they're just stuck in the past. They're these backwards people. They just want the idyllic 1950s forever, this kind of thing,
Yes.
And what you're saying is, that's more the reactionary group of folks, or, they just want to stay kind of stagnant. But you're more of, yes, you can't have two things, I guess. What I heard was good progress, I guess you could say, is typically very slow, because if it's too fast, you're going to have a lot of problems, which, this will make probably intuitive sense to both of us. That's an evolutionary model, right? In some ways. I mean, that's what we see in nature. That's what we see in the natural elements and within ourselves. Even if you look at it psychologically, I mean, if you look at clinical practice and how you do therapy, people get particularly frustrated because it's like, this is 4 months, when is, and most places, 6 months to a year is, really, really good change, but it's not 3 weeks and there you go, problem fixed.
Right.
Most things do take glacial change in some ways. And so you're saying that conservatism does want progress. They do want change in very measured attempts, not to do it, not to say we need to do it in a slow way, but that's just usually the process of really good, long-lasting, healthy change, this kind of incremental notion.
Yeah.
So I guess, how do you find the balance of, we hold our ideals, we hold the things from our past, but then we push towards, future change in the future for whichever problems are arising?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I mean, the comment about the 50s struck me because that's sort of my ideal time too. I'm like, the 50s. I mean, obviously I'm aware that there were plenty of, very unfortunate things happening in the 50s. You still had Jim Crow, for example. It was more patriarchal probably than I would want. I'm a fan of some traditional sex roles, but still, and then definitely LGBTQ, for example, problems there. But I think the fact that there was a lot, definitely there was more unity in the United States in the 50s. There was more agreement on certain underlying principles, for the most part, suggests something about how we might want to move forward. Also, I would say there's probably just like kind of a psychological quirk of nostalgia that conservatives have that I definitely have. That's inevitable. So that's just a part of it. I have to recognize the flaws with the past while having this kind of warm, nostalgic feeling about the age of Eisenhower or whatever.
Right.
Now, how do we discuss? I don't have a great answer for that. It's a great question because I think about that all the time. And I think, okay, let's compare the American Revolution to the French Revolution, for example. Why would I defend the American Revolution, but I wouldn't defend the French Revolution? And why is the American Revolution consistent with conservatism, if it is? And why isn't the French Revolution? And there aren't great answers there. I look at it and I think there are a few things that you can say, though, right? And maybe this will hold up when we're thinking about change now. So one thing about many of the American revolutionaries, not all of them, of course, but I'm talking more about the people, Hamilton, Madison, etc. They were very realistic, even pessimistic about human nature, and very anti-utopian. And there's something about that I think can guide our understanding of how change has to work. Because although when they met in Philadelphia in 1787 and they were working on a new project of government, that was kind of radical in a way, right?
Sure,
it was
certainly.
Also based on a fundamental understanding of the fallenness of humans in some sense, and the fact that human nature was very flawed. And it was also based on a lot of reading of the past, Romans, French writers, Montesquieu, Locke, et cetera, we can go through all of that. Even the British, what they considered sort of the British Constitution, right? Which in fact they thought a lot of the revolutionaries, this before 1787, thought that what had happened was actually they weren't being allowed the freedoms that should have been given to somebody under that Constitution in the American colonies. So all of that stuff makes the American Revolution different. So I think one of the things we can take from that is understanding how flawed humans are is really important. So if we want to make a change, in policing or something, this is a good example. We can talk about a concrete case. Abolish the police is completely ludicrous. It does not conform to anything we know about human nature. There are exploitative humans who are going to take advantage of others if there isn't some kind of force counterbalancing their desires, right? If there isn't the fear of punishment. So if we're trying to make a change in the criminal justice system, I'm happy with reflecting on it and thinking about what are the flaws in it. But let's understand what human nature is, and let's not promulgate these completely ludicrous notions that crime is motivated by want and need totally, and not simply by the fact that there are humans who will exploit other humans. I mean, that's just how it goes, right? So probably that's my biggest thing. Maybe some sort of critical reflection on the problems we have, because I'm in favor of that. I'm a fan of a humble kind of reason, but that has to be coupled with an understanding of the limitations of human nature and how flawed it is and how difficult it is to maintain order. And with anti-utopianism, I think like any utopianism is so repugnant to me because it begins to justify absolutely atrocious deeds. Because if you see a paradise in the future, if that means some pain now, why not, right? Like you can see the calculus. It makes the utilitarian calculus is perfectly reasonable if you really could achieve paradise, but you can't. So we always need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the first part of what you're saying was this kind of example of, how a conservative model for the future is rooted in essentially lessons from the past, right? There's lessons from history. And I totally agree. That's my reading too of the founding fathers was this pessimistic, cynical, very honest and real understanding of how flawed humans are. Like when you put a bunch of human beings together, they're going to do dumb shit. I mean, they're just going to do dumb shit. I mean, that's just how it works. I mean, you might not like it. I might not like it, but that's the reality. And
absolutely.
If we do not have safeguards in place of how to organize cultures and societies, that's going to happen. And so obviously you do not want those safeguards to work against the people you're trying to protect or to try and promote healthy living. But yeah, and then your example about, I think it is a good example about police brutality. I think there's the pragmatist in me always, it gets frustrated maybe for slightly different reasons, is you and I both agree abolishing the police is absolutely ridiculous. But, and what's more ridiculous is the people that, entertain an extreme idea and not calling it out and saying, wait a minute, too far. Okay, that's you can have your thoughts, but that's not tenable. But it's more about, that hurts the people, large groups of people more than others, right? If you look in many urban areas, that would hurt those people because they're living in a situation where it is more prone to violence or aggressive acts or what have you. And how, I don't understand how that would be helpful. Further, I think it doesn't accept the fact that there is nuance and there is difference, and the fundamental root of the problem, in my view, is police brutality is an issue and has to be dealt with. Trying to have alternative discussions around this situation like that is fine. You could have those discussions, but I don't think that's the core of the problem. And if you keep hitting all of the kind of deflectors in front of the core problem, you never get to the real issue. And so again, I think it's just kind of layered onto your idea of human nature is flawed, is kind of the big thing here. And so I guess kind of bridging into another aspect, typically of for some people it's a negative thing, maybe for conservatives it isn't. There's typically an alignment with, I guess you could say, Judeo-Christian values or some type of religious alignment, typically more Protestant types of ways of viewing things. And so, for Protestants or for kind of mainstream Christians, original sin is one of the pillars for understanding human nature. And they, for secular liberal Christians or even Reformed fundamentalists, that's like, that's the starting line, right? You have to acknowledge you're sinful. You have to acknowledge that there's original sin and that you need a savior and the whole thing. So it sounds like there is some, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like there's some bleeding that goes through with that, right? Where it's like there's a religious idea of original sin. And I don't think that's exactly what you're saying, but that there is at least in a secular version, there we have to understand the fallacies of human nature, something like that.
I would call it, so it's a good, I am not a religious believer, just in the sense that the metaphysics are implausible to me, but I
definitely agree with you.
But where I agree with people like Joseph Campbell and Jordan Peterson and other people who take myths seriously, for example, and there are a lot of people, of course, these myths are attempts to explain realities in various ways and to come to terms with them and to help humans to grapple with them. And so to me, the sort of religious concept of original sin is getting at this fundamental problem that humans have, which is we can imagine a nice world, but we can't create it, right? Like there's the gap between imagination. So original sin might be the gap between God and humans. And the way I think of it secularly is the gap between our moral imagination and our moral reality. And like, as you were saying, would say crime, for example. I mean, I remember this is something I got from Edmund Burke even when I was 20. I remember reading, I think it was The Portable Burke, and I think it was the intro to The Portable Burke, and it was talking about how, if there were simple solutions to problems such as urban violence, we would have come up with them by now. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's a good point. Even 20-year-old me finally kind of grasped that. I was like, if there were easy ways to solve these problems, we would have done it. People are trying. And I think there's this weird view among people who are farther on the left that conservatives just don't actually care, or that it's good for business not to solve these problems or whatever, as if they're not real recalcitrant problems that are caused by human nature, not by like institutional failure. I think that's like probably one of the fundamental things that divides people on this continuum of from say progressive to very conservative, maybe reactionary, is what do you think the cause of social problems is? I happen to think most of them are caused by human nature. A lot of people who are farther on the left think that they're caused by institutional failure, or civilization creates greed and lust and the concept of ownership. You kind of get this sense from some of the evolutionary literature on, say, sexuality, for example, is interesting in that, some of these people make these claims that jealousy actually didn't exist before the agricultural revolution because the concept of ownership didn't exist, right? I just find this stuff remarkably implausible, and it's shifting blame from a fundamental feature of human nature that we just have to deal with and work with to a social institution. And that's the thing that I find probably the most off-putting about progressivism is it ends up attacking institutions that are attempting to grapple with human nature as best they can, and it blames them for these problems, and then it ends up undermining. So the criminal justice system, for example, a lot of people don't have trust in it now, and that's really dangerous because.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you need a sense of fairness, and the fact that some groups are overrepresented, let's say in prison, well, that's about the culture of the group or certain personality characters, whatever. I mean, when you undermine now, if it's legitimate to undermine it, fine. But when you do so illegitimately, the way you undermine it is through mendacious narratives that just don't hold up to actual scrutiny, then that's really dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And I think that I totally agree. I mean, it's since the dawn of man, we've had these, again, if you root this in our evolutionary DNA, this stuff shouldn't surprise anybody.
Right.
And certainly as we progress, we're going to make advances as we, in some ways, I guess, continue to evolve, not in the same way in terms of species, but in terms of our brains, our minds, what our capacities are. But the thing about it is that when you're thinking about, okay, yeah, these things with human nature are this way. This is, kind of your example about jealousy, which is, it's hard not to laugh at a claim like that. I can't really understand that claim, but it's one of those things where it's like, of course, this has been there since the beginning. And we see this in other primates. We see this in other species. Like, this isn't
right.
specific to humans.
Yes.
But I will push a little bit. And I don't think you're not saying this, but I do think that, so certainly, placating blame on systems and institutions is misguided. But I do think, you can tell me what your thoughts are on this, that there's definitely been periods or time, and even still today, where many of those systems don't have, you can call it the incentive, to be very aggressive in how they make sure that they're not kind of funneling some of the worst parts of our human nature. I do think that there are some systems that they have some role to play in some of those negative things. I don't think it's the system or institution's fault per se,
right?
But I do think that there is, and how they propagate it further, I do think that there is some role in that. I don't know how you see it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And like, you can think of concrete examples. And so I guess just to say what are some of the flaws with conservatism? Like, here might be one, is that there might be excessive deference to institutions, right? And sometimes it is just the incentive structures are set up in a way that cause institutions to, or really such that the institutions cause humans to deviate from what we might consider better moral behavior. It'll never be optimal, but better. So like, for example, if you're a fan of The Wire, it's my favorite show.
It's one of the best shows ever created.
Right, exactly. Objectively speaking.
Objectively.
I have a few criticisms of it that are sort of abstract and intellectual, but one thing that it does is it's an indictment on the way institutions sort of shape humans and sometimes corrupt them, and each season sort of picks on a different institution. And there's truth to that, right? So think about, for example, the Catholic Church and the scandal with priests. Spotlight's one of my favorite movies. It does an excellent job of looking at,
great film,
hey, by the way, when an institution, namely journalism, is working well, so it depicts the institution of journalism working well, and it shows how this institution, a lot of these people who were protecting people in the Catholic Church, they weren't bad humans. And the people in the community in Boston, they weren't bad people. They were stuck in a system that had incentives that made them behave a certain way, or made is too strong, but, shaped their behavior, incentivized it. So absolutely, you have to criticize that. And that's what some of these people and these journalists did. And the same thing might be true for the police. It might be true for universities. Here's a good example. Today, I think journalism has bad incentives sort of the other way, and that the incentives now are to say extreme things and to take extreme positions, because it's a very online culture in which extremism is rewarded, right? You and I both know this, and probably lament this quite a bit on Twitter. So like, if you're look at the ACLU, for example. The ACLU has went effing nuts.
Yeah, complete backslidden. I mean, just completely.
Right. So now they're defending, for example, men in women's sports, or trans women in women's sports, etc., and acting as though that's just like run of the mill. You should obviously accept that, and if you don't, you're some kind of bigot. New York Times, sort of, Washington Post especially, did this sort of resistance and adopting democracy dies in darkness, and just this very
sensationalism.
And very perturbing to me, because I think it's important to have respect in the media and to have trust in it. so that we can do the real journalism that you like. Think of the Spotlight team and that kind of journalism where you had 5, 6, 7 people working for a year or years on this story to get it right. And you were able to devote that many resources to them. And they didn't do the sensationalism. They didn't, like, think of what would happen now. You would just have some internet outlet, the Daily Flapper or whatever, and it would say, priests, pedophile priests everywhere, and it would ruin the story because you wouldn't have enough evidence for it. You wouldn't take it seriously, whatever, right? So, yes, I absolutely think that institutions can start to deform or whatever, or become stale and sort of they're not adapting or they're ill adapting to challenges that we have. And we have to think about that. And conservatives should be willing to think about that and not always defer to institutions, even though I think there's an a priori reason for some deference from like a Bayesian perspective. I guess what I think is, if there's an institution that has survived for thousands of years, say the Catholic Church, it's survived for 2,000 years, which is
it's a long time.
Roughly it's a very long time. So I think to myself, you know what, 20-year-old me was kind of a fire-eating atheist, oh yeah, like this is bullshit, people lie, whatever. Right. And then slowly I started to see the wisdom and, maybe scaling that back and thinking this is an institution that has survived with certain stories and myths and behavioral practices, etc., for a long time. Maybe it's doing something good that I just don't understand, and I should be epistemically humble. And this is another part I like about conservatism, is I actually think it promotes epistemic humility, because what it says is, right, you don't know everything.
Right.
There's a sign that says speed limit 55, and you think to yourself, that's stupid, I could go 80. The conservative says, you know what, maybe you should exercise some humility and think that there's a reason the speed limit is 55 here, even if you don't know it, right? Now, sometimes it turns out the reason is they just want to get more tickets, and so it's a bad reason, right? But often it's a good reason. So I think it's reasonable to defer to the institution, but to be critical and to update as we go along.
Yeah, again, agreed. I think that there's this erosion of trust in certain institutions, and journalism is one of them.
Yes.
And I think it, in part, some of the tenets of some democratic principles here in the United States, when we have too much, I think, for whichever reasons, distrust in that is, that is chaos, and that's deeply harmful for kind of the general tenor of, society and its inhabitants. But I think that, kind of what you were saying about the Catholic Church and everything, I have terribly strong opinions about the Catholic Church. But most of my criticisms are, and I plan on sharing some of them at some point, but most of them is on the dogma, and it's definitely not against Catholic individuals. And I'm like you, I can respect kind of the longevity of the institution, and I think that has merits and has value for many people around the world. And so, but I think some of the dogma and some of their kind of backwards ways of thinking about things is deserves harsh criticism. But it's like when was it cathedral? Was it the Notre Dame Cathedral in France that burned down? Was that it? Well, that was it, right?
The top burned. Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember, I'm not French. French people are fine. The country's fine. The culture's fine. But understanding that that's been there for 500 years,
maybe more,
1,000.
I have to look it up. And it's spectacular and beautiful. So
the aesthetics alone are gorgeous, but then it's just like it was the institutional aspect of it, of sorts. It's a different type of institutional piece of it, but it was like deeply, like, surprising to me, troubling It's like, oh, because there's representative qualities in that.
Yeah.
And there are so many things in that representation for many people in France, but then, just for humans, it's like if the pyramids crumble today, I mean, I would be beside myself.
Yeah, yes, it's rife with meaning. In the way that the thing I think about with something like that, like a cathedral, I'm a huge fan of cathedrals. So I think about it's the concrete manifestation of a beautiful idea, and it requires the labor of hundreds of people and the expertise and technical know-how of thousands of years of humans, right? It's just like all of that put together, and there's just like beautiful and wonderful thing. And yeah, it's like I would be devastated if it's sort of like Western. It's a symbol of Western civilization in some sense that really means something to me, and that's why I find it so disgusting. That's really the only word I can use for it. When you see these 20 to 40-year-old people looting and rioting and breaking shit and just laughing about it and mocking. There's this kind of, and we can get into some of the MAGA, not all of it, of course, but there's something like this in some of the MAGA too, just this kind of nihilism about culture and the truth, and like, fuck the institutions. I just want them to learn, like the sooner the better. And it's profoundly disturbing to me, because I don't think that that's conservative on the right, and I don't think it is on the left. And it really bothers me, because these are institutions that took thousands of years to build up, and you're just laughing at it, and you're laughing at people who take them seriously. But that's what you need. You need to take them seriously to preserve them. That's how you do that. And I'll just say, I mean, I know you said we'd talk about it in a bit, but just to say about the election, the thing that has so disturbed me is watching that press conference, Donald Trump's press conference on Thursday, just burned my soul, because he's sitting there attacking the fundamental norm of a democratic society, namely the peaceful transition of power and recognition of the sanctity of the vote. And that's not something that's funny or you can troll about. That's real. And I went back and I watched GHW Bush's. I'm a huge GHW fan.
I have many sympathies to HW
so
Bush.
I watched GHW's, not to be confused with GW, whom I mean, he's a good guy, but don't like.
No, HW,
Watch his, exactly. Watched his speech, and I was just so moved by it, because it was so graceful and dignified. It was just the very opposite of this just disgusting and loathsome performance. And I don't understand how people who claim to be conservative could support somebody who would undermine the most important norm in our society. It really is. Since when we first had this, people don't understand this, like how important and miraculous the peaceful transfer of power is, right? In 1800, when it went from Adams the Federalist to the Democratic Republican Jefferson, and that was like the original Flight 93 election. Like, we can read all of the things that people said, but you know what? It went off peacefully. Jefferson gave this fantastic speech. We are all Federalists. We are all anti-Federalists. Just wonderful speech. That's how you have to handle that, with dignity and grace and suppressing the fires of passion. And Trump is the exact opposite. He's like Godzilla marching through the city of our democracy, spitting laser fire or whatever Godzilla is out, and just trampling on it. And so anyway, I mean, I hate that on both the right and the left. You know, it disturbs me both in both cases.
We can get into it, but I'll just say on this point that sometimes people will ask me, like, why don't you say enough bad things about Trump and President Trump, and and I always find it interesting what is the thing that people don't like about Trump, and for me, I certainly don't enjoy the bombast and the arrogance and the trolling, and it's not pleasant for me.
Right.
I can get why some people kind of like it, you know, kind
Yes.
of I understand it.
Yep.
And I know some people that have, I mean, that's their thing. Like, that's why they hate him. It's just, it's all, you know, the temperament and the optics and the character. And I get it. I get it. But the things that always made me, you know, at the very least, dislike his politics and then dislike him is the things that always would flirt with, or, you know, a lot of hand waving and eye winks to, again, a gross disruption to our institutional principles.
Yes.
When those things, when he says those things, that's the stuff I have zero tolerance for. And those are the things why I can't consider him, because it's that kind of stuff. It's like, if this was a Mitt Romney, I wouldn't even, I mean, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. I wouldn't
would
care.
have voted for him.
Yeah, I wouldn't have cared. If he would have won in 12, I wouldn't have had no problem.
Right.
You
Exactly.
know, we disagree on policy issues, fine. No big deal. McCain, same thing. Like, you know, and yeah, that press conference, it was like he was, you know, I don't want to be too vulgar, but it's like he pulled his pants down and was just peeing all over our democratic institution.
No, it really was.
Just absolute disregard. And that kind of stuff that kind of stuff pulls out my nationalism. It's like, no, like, that's not right. Like, that's not the thing in the third debate, I think it was. Yeah, because there was no second debate. The third debate was, there was a lot of things. You know, it was okay debate compared to the first one, but it was, there was all of the, you know, stuff that was going on at the moment. He was trying to trash Biden and all that. And okay, fine. It's just, you know, politics are ugly. But when he kept emphasizing, well, those are democratic cities. Those are democratic states. I mean, that stuff. And again, if this was, you know, take your pick, John Kerry, John Edwards, Barack Obama, whichever Democrat you want, Hillary Clinton, and if they were saying that, I would have had the same ire. I would have been vehemently opposed to any of those kind of statements. And him saying that, I just was like, that's the thing that, like, you know, triggered me or whatever. It's like, I can't with this.
That
stuff.
It's true. You're absolutely right that you can't. He doesn't act as though, he never has acted as though he is the president of the United States. He is the president of his base. Now, people will say to me, because probably not surprisingly, a lot of my followers are sympathetic to Trump. So I get a lot of shit for these things. And people will say to me, they will mock me and say, well, you just have this aesthetic preference. You don't like it because Trump doesn't seem nice. And I find that so galling because no, it's not an effing aesthetic preference. No. It is somebody who's spitting on our norms. That is more than an aesthetic preference. The aesthetic preference is like, does he say the F word too much or something? Right. And we're talking about somebody who, yes, he calls it a democratic city as if it doesn't even matter because it's them. Who gives a shit? It's them. No, that's not, that is attacking a norm, which is every bit as bad as throwing a brick through a window. That's what I don't understand that these people don't get. Norms are like institutions. You can break them apart. And when you spit on them and when you attack them, that's exactly what you're doing. You're looting and rioting against the norms of our civilization. So that's what bothers me. I'm 100% with you. And I'm more sympathetic to Trumpism in the sort of ideological sense than most people are. I care a lot about immigration. I like what they've achieved on immigration. I care about other issues. I'm a nationalist conservative. I like that. It pains me that I had to say I can't vote for this guy, even though I like what's happened to the GOP in some sense, minus the attitude, which I don't like. But in the sort of ideological sense, I love it that it's not the G.W. Bush Republican Party anymore, which I disdain. I don't like it. I didn't like that war in Iraq. I don't like Wall Street Journal Republicanism. So it's not aesthetic. So I hate that. And people will say this. They'll say, oh, but Orange Man bad. as if that's my argument is
Right.
orange. No, that's so
Right. It never was that. That never was the argument.
Of course it wasn't. It's just so like, if you disagree with me, fine.
Right.
But my argument and your argument and Colin Wright's and other people who had to say no to Trump, Andrew Sullivan, Sam Harris, our argument is not Orange Man bad. And it's so, it does a disservice to your own thought to caricature our thought that way, because you're not actually grappling with the challenge that we're raising. And you can see, like, with the Harris podcast with Sullivan, which I suspect you listened to.
Yeah, I heard it. I heard it. Yeah.
So, you know, there's this other term that's thrown about, Trump derangement syndrome.
Right.
And maybe there's some merit to this term. I have to, it's a complicated thing. But look, somebody this malignant to our institutions, it's not derangement syndrome to say, you know what, even though I don't like the Democratic base, I don't like the radical progressives, and I don't even particularly want Joe Biden's policies, but it's worth it to excise this tumor from our political life. That's not derangement syndrome. That would be like saying it's derangement syndrome to vote for Trump because people were throwing bricks through through stores in Seattle. I understand that, and I wouldn't call that. I don't call that BLM derangement syndrome.
No, right? it's fair. It's fair.
So just grapple with the arguments instead of, and I'll tell you what, just personally, anytime I do a tweet that's anti-Trump in some way, I lose 50 followers. Just immediately, just gone, just vaporized. And it's hilarious because these people will say to me, they will say, oh, you just want to be in good standing with your liberal buddies, and that's why you do it. It's like, no, I could have 100,000 followers if I went all out MAGA and just was unforgiving about it. I truly believe this because I am conservative and I like our norms and institutions, and Trump is not. In fact, he's the opposite of a conservative. He's everything the founders rejected and warned about. A person who would come up and care more about his own interests than the country's, and just say F you to the norms, and just a dangerous, worrisome demagogue. I mean, it's the only way to put it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to say it this way, but I suspect you and I would be having the same conversation if this was a similar type of person on the left.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is really not a political calculus here. This is really anybody that is going to be definitely in a position of power, right? One of the most powerful positions. Taking a big shit on our institutions. That's
yes, absolutely.
If you want to call that deranged, fine. I just think that's being a good American. I don't know why.
It's what you said. It's nationalism. There's a nationalism about saying, no, fuck you. America is awesome, and we will not tolerate this.
Right.
And absolutely, I'm sympathetic to the right. I want to like Trump. Like, it pained me, especially in June, July, when Black Lives Matter was getting really popular and you had this looting and rioting. I wanted to turn to Trump and just say, somebody stand up against this. I'm like, but I just, at the end of the day, I can't, because of exactly what you said. And if it were, it's hard to imagine. See, the thing is, like, I try to think of, like, what would be the equivalent on the left? Like, because really, Trump's malignancy is hard to overstate. I agree with Harris. It really is hard to imagine somebody of equal personality, sort of an equally detrimental and loathsome personality. It's really hard to come up with. But imagine that you did on the left. I would be 100% speaking against him. You would too. And here's the thing that bothers me. These people, all of these people who, not all, many of the people who have made peace with Trump would be lighting their hair on fire about this person on the left if he were doing it.
110%.
Right?
Yeah, 110%. Right. Yeah. And I know we're all inconsistent people, but one of the things I shoot for is some type of consistency. And I hate double standards half the time. And it's like, look, if you're going to call it here, then call it here too. If it's on your team, it's on your side,
right.
you know, you got to call it there too, and vice versa. So when that's not happening, you know, it is harder to sometimes engage, because it's just like, okay, like I hear you, I get it's your person or it's your team, but come on, there has to be other things that are beyond just, you know, teams. And I mean, I've had, you know, plenty of tweets, I've had plenty of conversations where, you know, I have been in tough conversations and arguments with the left. I mean, I pick on them all the time. All the time I'm criticizing them for many things. And, you know, it's very hard for people to kind of, it's like, oh yeah, you just don't like Trump because, you know, he's the bad guy, he's the villain. It's like, no, I wish it was that simple, and it just isn't.
So do I. And I mean, like, let's just take an example. Take like Ben Shapiro, say. Now, he's criticized Trump, and I give him credit for that. But you cannot tell me that if somebody equally malignant as Trump on the left ever gained the presidency, Ben Shapiro would even have a scintilla of tolerance for somebody who said, I'm voting for that person again. Absolutely. Let's say AOC, but
even then, though,
that's not even a fair comparison, because
not.
AOC is like much more humane and like decent than Trump. But I don't like her. I don't like her extremely.
I was going to say, to be clear, I find her beliefs and her policies, you know, abhorrent.
Yes,
but
so, as do I.
But
right.
She's a decent human being in terms
she's
of her
a decent human
character.
Although I would now to give a little bit to just people who might make this argument, I do think we can underestimate the danger of wokeism because it's appealing to decent people. Because in fact, sometimes that's what's more dangerous. It's something that an illiberal sort of ideology that's appealing to decency, and people think they're morally righteous, et cetera. So I understand those concerns. So let's just grant that. But yes, AOC is more of a decent human than Trump, clearly. Now, do you think that Ben Shapiro would be like, you know what, it's okay to vote for AOC again, even though she has all of these extreme behaviors, and she said, I'm going to make a list about these Trump? Hell no, he wouldn't. And you're right. When you don't call out both sides, I'm a conservative, that's fine. But if you don't call out both sides, you're undermining fairness, the sense of fairness. And like, that's important. It's important to have a set of neutral rules that we all abide by, even though we might not like the player who's winning from them. We still abide by them. And I think that's what's really important. And I think one of the really deleterious things about the Trump era is that a lot of people have burned their criticism capital because they didn't criticize Trump. And now when they try to criticize somebody on the left, people are just going to flip them the bird and say, too bad.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's you know, that really is, I would say, the Republican Party's, I mean, that's their challenge right now. They got to figure out a way. And there's only so much spin in the world. So they're going to have a tough time with that. It's, you know,
there are people like Ben Sass, I think, who, you know, look, he didn't get up and condemn Trump the way Flake did, but he also still has a Senate seat, and he never like embraced Trump. And he clearly criticized him in I guess you would say, reading between the lines. You know, he definitely criticized him, and there are people like that. And I Susan Collins, and I applaud those people.
My governor here in the great state of Maryland, you know, Hogan has been. I wouldn't say he was hard on Trump, but he definitely. He chose his battles, I think, well, and he would say, this isn't right. You know, I don't agree with this. He's going to have his opinions, and, you know, especially during COVID and all this stuff. So I think, you know, folks like that. Like, sure, he didn't come out and just, you know, put the hammer on him, but he also wouldn't just go along with it either. And so he did this kind of, it's political. He did this kind of, you know, dance with that.
And it's politics like that. It's so hard because you get shit from both sides. So like, when I defend Ben Sass, then leftists are like, dude, why didn't he stand up and, you know, fulminate against this great evil? And it's like, look, you have to understand political reality. I mean, if everybody who disliked Trump had done that, they would be out of a job, and you would just have a lot more Trumpy people around, and you
Right.
wouldn't have responsible adults in these places. So like, it's not as if Ben Sass or Hogan or some of these other people, Marco Rubio even, who's been a little iffier, but it's not as if they're Nazi collaborators.
Right.
Right. Like and it's, I'm sure you have those too. It's frustrating as somebody who's about conciliation and you see people saying like, look, they're trying to like kill you. It's a war. And it's like, no, if it's a war, then fuck it. We've already lost.
Right.
Like we have to try to persuade people. There's no alternative to that. I get what these people are saying. And look, I got fired. I went through it. I paid the price. I know how it works. I'm sure you've paid prices. But if we don't persuade people in the middle, we're lost. That's how it is. We have to do that.
And I 100% agree. It's this to me, the way out of those things is having a more balanced approach and attitude towards both sides, and then having, good, hard pragmatism. Now, that's not to say that you can't have, certain extremes on both sides, or you can't have some progressivism, some idealism, but it has to be rooted in, again, kind of to the beginning of what we were saying, this kind of reality that progress and change happens slowly and probably should. Otherwise, you're just going to alienate people if you do it too quickly, and then it doesn't work. Yes. And I think a lot of us would like it most days to go a little bit faster. But, because it doesn't, it doesn't mean you just say, well, let's just burn it all down.
Right. And also, and importantly, I think we could maybe like make a distinction between sort of my political philosophy in terms of like the way I view the world as conservative, but then my I like pragmatism, pragmatic conservative, whatever. But then like I also have I'm an institutionalist. Now, I think that should follow from conservatism, but it should also follow from people on the left. You can have like views like, hey, ultimately my goal is to get the marginal tax rate on the richest people to say, I don't know, 50% or whatever. But I'm an institutionalist, and I believe the way that I can do that is I persuade people, and I do it through the vote, not by attacking norms or acting as if I'm in an all-out war, right? And that's what I like about Biden. Look, there are problems with Biden.
Sure.
But one of the reasons I wanted him to win when I realized, like, look, I'm not going to be able to support Trump. I wanted somebody on the left who was an old school institutionalist. And that's exactly what Biden is. Yes, he believes in systemic racism, and I don't. He thinks things about global warming that I don't. But at the end of the day, he believes in the institutions of our country. Trump doesn't. That's a big difference. Biden is, in fact, I think you could make a very good argument that Biden is by far the more conservative candidate. He's
100%.
Right, exactly. He's 100%. The old school, do it in the Senate, be friends with each other, reach across the aisle. Trump is just I don't care about the other side at all. They're blue states. Who cares about them? Like if people are dying, but they're in blue states, whatever.
His compass is so misaligned. It doesn't have a wide lens on it. It's just the most parochial kind of lens you could think of.
That's a way of putting it. It's a very narrow, focused lens on self-interest, period. Like that, as that press conference indicated, like the guy couldn't put aside his own hurt feelings for 5 minutes to unify. And you know what's weird is like the third debate, which you drew this example from that I agree was repugnant. But for the first 5 minutes, you almost saw a Trump that could have been more popular.
Yeah.
This sort of like, it's not Biden's fault. It's not my fault. It's just like there was this discipline. I started thinking like, imagine if Trump were if you just tuned up the self-sacrifice and the sort of like tuned down the churlishness and the sort of childish egocentrism. You could imagine a much more successful politician who could be conciliatory at times, etc. Like just weird that you capture that for 5 minutes. And I'm like, oh wow, like he's being really disciplined, and then you lose it, of course.
Yeah, and then the moment's gone. It's like,
yeah.
I have been telling the past couple of days my liberal friends, like, look, let's be clear. The Democrats nominated one of the most moderate centrist Democrats in a long time. And if Trump was a little bit better and there was no virus and there was somebody else outside of Biden, I mean, even if there wasn't, even if it was still Biden, but Trump was a little bit better and there was no virus, I think he would have got beat. And if this was someone like a Liz Warren or Kamala herself on the top of the ticket, I mean, it would have been a slaughter, political slaughter.
Yeah, I think if you look at, we'll have to look at the data and think about it carefully, but coming in, the suburbs suggest that really the center held and also the fact that Republicans outperformed relative to Trump. What this suggests is exactly what you said, and that it was a refutation of Trump, his personality,
not republicanism, and not
even national conservatism.
Right.
It was, we really don't like you, Trump, and we're comfortable. People from the suburbs are like, we're comfortable with this Biden guy. He's not going to burn it down. He's very moderate. If you had run out Bernie Sanders or somebody, who knows what would have happened. And I'm happy. That's why my brother and I, and you can talk to him. I think when he goes on, you can talk to him about it. I was right, because I was always arguing Biden was the best possible candidate the Democrats could have pulled out. Like political observers think he's kind of boring and he's older and he's not terribly cognitively with it, perhaps. But you know what?
I love boring. I love boring.
I love it too.
I love boring.
I love GHW Bush. Very boring, very responsible.
Right, very respectful. I like boring.
You don't have to think about, you don't have to wake up and be like, oh, what WTF Biden today?
Yeah.
Biden launched this tweet storm about enemies of the people.
Right.
It's just really nice, and dare I say, the other thing that's weird too is that people will say to me, this is a good thing to think about. People will say to me, like, what are you going to do about wokeism now that you don't have Trump? And I'm like, dude, my battle against wokeism doesn't rely on the president. That's not how things work in America.
This is a cultural issue. That's a cultural battle in society.
Exactly. It's a cultural issue. Donald Trump, or any other president for that matter, can't change the culture of the country.
No.
That is a cultural battle that you have to win on the ground by persuading people. Now, I understand that, say, Title IX interpretation, which they're going to change probably under Biden. That's bad. I don't like that. And there are some things that are bad that are real from the president. But by and large, it's a cultural problem. And it's going to be the way you win cultural wars, persuading people.
Yeah, you got to talk to people. You have to have conversations. You have to, the thing that I've said to a lot of people, and I definitely think this is something that your brother and I will probably get into, is where the reform is on both sides comes from moderates in the party. And by nature, moderates don't like drama. They just don't. They don't. They're just plugging away. Just, they're doing policy stuff. They're doing the norms. Okay. They don't like getting involved in the extremes. And I think that mantle has to be on the moderates in each party to say, hey, we get it. You have your ideas. They're a little extreme. Okay. We can take some of that, but the rest of it, cut that shit out. Don't do that.
Right.
We're not doing that. No, that's not going to happen. We can take some of it or whatever, but this isn't going to be the centerpiece of the party, right? It has to be maybe a piece of it, but it has to be a holistic kind of approach. And I think that behooves moderates on the left and moderates on the right to get the extremism of their parties together. And catch me on a certain day. And some days I feel really optimistic about that, and other days I feel absolutely depressed about that.
Same here. It's a volatile thing. Sometimes like, yeah, like Susan Collins in Manchin, that's where it's at. Like, you know, the center's holding. And then other days I'm like, what the hell is AOC talking about? Why are these people? And I think a thing for people that's important to recognize is that to hold together a country that's as diverse and populated as ours is requires that you don't get everything you want. You know what I mean? Like, you just have to accept that and live your life disappointed all the time, because you're not going to get it.
But and this is the thing. This is the thing I don't understand. I don't understand this. I feel like there's a lot of people, maybe they just haven't paid attention or something, but I mean, you and I both read tremendous amounts of history, American history, and all the rest. Like, that's not abnormal. Like, that's always been the case, more or less.
Yes, that is. I mean, how do you hold together a large? Anytime you.
How do you hold the third largest country in the world together, right? And I'll say this, right? And I think you'll agree with me on this. Liberals are always going on about diversity and everything, and I think I understand their conceptualization of that. What they don't look at, and I just don't think people look at this on a lot of issues, is limits to things. One of the limits of diversity, and or you could say one of the problems of diversity, is when you have a very diverse country, it is going to be glacially slow to do anything, especially if it's in a democracy. How are you supposed to have 350 million opinions of people that come from different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds? In theory, how would you expect that to happen?
Well, it's really weird because progressives undermine their own economic desires by promoting and defending identitarianism, right? Because yes, so first of all, just having diversity, of course, has these effects, but you can deal with having diversity, you know, it's whatever. But when you promote identitarianism, then you're promoting factionalism almost by necessity. I mean, that's almost the default. That's the sort of a concomitant that's inevitable. And that means you're going to be less likely to get big programs passed because people don't trust each other as much. They don't like the other side as much. And I would say, and this is where I run into a lot of problems with my friends on the left, I would say, we have to admit that diversity, the creed that diversity is good, it's just silly. It's a platitude that it's not actually even meaningless because it's wrong. It's not always good. It's hard.
No.
It causes a lot of trouble. And I think we have to say, we'll celebrate the diversity we have because it's here already. It's not going anywhere. We need to do that. But we don't need to think that it's better to have more. And this is where perhaps one of my more controversial opinions is just that it's not racist to prefer to maintain the demographics as they are. People get really worked up about this when I say this, but it's like people, including Hispanics, by the way, and blacks, get attached to the demographic composition of a country and they don't want it to change. And so it causes them anxiety and consternation when it does change. And I think that's understandable. And we have to deal with that humanely and judiciously, but recognize you don't have to be a raging racist not to want the country to turn brown overnight. I mean, that's not, there's nothing despicable about that. Other people in other countries don't want their country to change demographically too much either. And I think we can understand that because countries have a lot of sort of sources of identity. And one of those sources of identity is sort of the average demographic character, you know? So that's my biggest, that's all.
I was going to say, so sorry, I didn't want to cut you in there.
But go ahead.
I wanted to say that that was definitely one, probably last big hitter we can hit here is immigration.
Yeah, sounds good.
So maybe I'll start a little bit with this. I'll I'll be the kindling for the fire here on you. So,
Sounds good.
So my views on immigration have been all over the place, and I feel like I've found a nice pocket. But maybe you can change my mind, or maybe I'll double down. But my idea about immigration is, in my view, you have a country like the United States that has waves and waves and waves of immigration throughout its history, right? And I think that's a part of its cultural identity in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that particularly bothers me and worries me is too much too fast. And there are at least 11 million, it's probably 15 or 16 million,
right,
undocumented folks that are in the country. So the people aren't problems, but the way in which all of that is kind of arranged within systems and communities is sort of problematic. And I think you also have people that have lived here for a long time and they don't have either citizenship, or they don't have residency or documentation, and yet they have children here and they're in high school and they have jobs and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So those are the people aren't problems. I'm not trying to say that, but there are problems associated with that within society.
Yes.
And my view is we have to figure that out before we start opening the doors wide open and saying, come on in, just come on in, because I want to just be, I want the country to be a utopia or a United Nations or this whole place of that. And right. I don't think that means, okay, let's close up the doors, full stop. Let's, steel wall. Let's put a moat around the whole border on the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Pacific. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is with immigration in particular, you have plenty of folks that are here already and have been here for a long time that we should invest in a healthy way.
Agreed.
And this is where I get into hot waters. At least acculturate, if not assimilate, to the cultural and national identity of the United States, which is not, in my view, and this is predicated on my general thesis, which is that is not white supremacist. No, right? To have a national identity in the United States does not mean it's a white supremacist nation.
Agreed.
We have many dark chapters, large periods of really ugly history, but everybody at some point has had different ways of immigration. And in that way, the axiom of we're all immigrants, we all come from immigrants is true, right? But it's more than that, though. Out of that, we have created in this country certain national norms, right? Mm-hmm. That has to be fostered and that has to be promoted. It's not this, melting pot kind of idea where it's just like, well, you bring a little bit of stuff from here and you bring a little bit of stuff here, and we're just going to put it all together and we're going to stir it up and we're just going to have some really nice, whatever it is. I think it's more of, okay, how are we going to be able to say, how do we invest in people here and how do we promote some sense of acculturation and in some cases assimilation if we're able to make progress? So what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I would virtually agree with all of that. And I would go maybe even a little harder on the restriction in that mm-hmm. if I had my own druthers, I'd be happy to shut it up for 5 years just to see what, mm-hmm. With the exception of, refugees, it gets a little more complicated there.
Sure.
But I mean, people don't understand the scope of this experiment. For the past, say, 55, 60 years, we've had a million or more immigrants per year. A lot of them who are not of European or predominantly European ancestry. Now, you can say that shouldn't matter. Why does it matter what their ancestry is? It does, because you cannot like this, but people have an automatic affinity for an ethnic group that is probably an ineradicable feature of human nature. Just that I think of it as sort of like kinds of gravity, like that draw you to different people. So if you share an ideology with someone, you're more drawn to them almost automatically.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're in a bar and everybody in there is a different race and you see one person who's your race, you're automatically like, oh, hey, this guy, I sort of just feel this kind of kinship with this person automatically. And that's not necessarily bad. It can be bad. It can sort of degenerate or metastasize into this really repulsive form of racism and racial chauvinism. Right. But it can just be this kind of ethnic affinity that's not that bad.
Well, it's familiar.
Yeah, it's familiar, etc. Whatever it is. But what it does mean is that when you start throwing a bunch of ethnic groups together, you can expect that they'll break apart into their ethnic groups and they'll have more affinity with each other. And it will cause it to be much more difficult to have a group bond there unless you work on that. And that's what America did for a long time. You have to work on that and create this national identity. And the more, this is something Rehan Salan, who's a child of immigrants, wrote about in Melting Pot or Civil War. The more immigrants you get, the more they tend to balkanize because they're surrounded by other immigrants with whose culture they share, and they don't need to acculturate to the larger culture, right? And that creates its own kind of problem. So there are all these kinds of challenges that I think we need to recognize and be honest about. We are to protect a diverse country from falling apart from the inside. And one thing I really hate about this conversation, this topic, is that you're essentially not allowed to talk about it openly in polite company without getting in trouble or called
xenophobic or racist.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, all the greatest hits.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really repulsive because this is a problem that is probably the most important problem of the 21st century, that is changing demographics in the United States, in European countries in general. What that means for our future and how do we grapple with it. And to do that successfully, you have to have a hard, rigorous, assiduous conversation and debate. And we're not having that because people are afraid to say what they think. And instead they go out and vote for Trump because they're not allowed to talk about it.
That's right. I totally agree with that, because what it does is it creates, when you're not having hard conversations, the ideas or the instincts don't go away. There's just a void that's created. And if you get a person that is going to say, hey, you know what? Well, that's fine if you want to talk about that, but let's talk about it in the worst possible way.
Right.
Well, then you can't be upset if you're not having that conversation, and people need to have that conversation. So I totally agree with you on that.
You create a niche for what you would call a political entrepreneur, right? Somebody who's like, nobody's talking about this. I'm going to talk about how bad Mexican immigrants are. Now, I'm not saying the way he did that was good. It wasn't.
Right.
There are people who have legitimate concerns about that. And they heard that and they were like, I can talk about what I believe finally, because this person's not going to judge me for saying, I don't like it that I have to speak Spanish here. Because some people, they don't want to call, you call somewhere and it's like, it goes in Spanish. And you're like, why the F am I speaking Spanish in my own country where I learned English, right? People don't like that. And if you say that around academics, they'll be like, you're a racist. You're small-minded. You know what I mean? But it's like, no, that's a very understandable human response. I don't want my culture to change.
So there's two pieces with this. It's really, it's nuanced. It's really nuanced. So I'll give two examples, I guess. So I don't think that every single town and city and unincorporated needs to have a diverse populace.
Right.
I just don't.
I would agree with that.
I don't think it should just be cities.
Yeah, but here's a question. I'm going to interrupt.
Okay, yeah.
So I think it's perfectly okay. Now, I'm not saying that you can treat people differently once they're in your area, but if some area in Wisconsin or, Iowa or Wisconsin likes being predominantly white, I don't have a problem with that.
Me neither, yeah.
Right? Like, fine. And I hate this imperial wokeism that says, no, you have to love diversity because we do. And we're going to come to your community and we're going to change it because you have to do that. That's what I don't like.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so just to be mindful of the time, I'll just say, yes, I think so. That's number one, I think is just, I don't think that needs to be the case. I definitely don't think it should be forced on people to be the case. I think that happens over time. And when that is forced, then it becomes, other people are there to prey on that. So maybe I'll do this. I'll kind of end it with a quick anecdote, and then we'll leave you with that, and we can definitely pick up on it, another time. So my dad came here because of a pretty brutal civil war in Central America, and he came here.
Where from?
El Salvador is where he's from, and and
like during the 80s.
In 80, he came here in 80.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
And he was a young adolescent, and so it was brutal. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, bodies everywhere in the cities, and death threats in school. I mean, it was grotesque. And he comes here, probably as by definition a refugee at this point, right? But he came here illegally, and he came here and he worked hard and got papers, and he's been a citizen for 30 years or whatever it is. But my dad always says something is, when you come here and you live here, that's your country. You don't forget the country you come from.
Sure.
You don't forget your culture that's there. But when you come here, and my dad will be the person that will be most upset about this. He will always tell people from his own country or other people and say, you have to learn English. You have to know how to do culture. It doesn't mean you need to go to every baseball game and eat hot dogs, but you have to integrate. You have to be, and my dad will fly the American flag, and this is his country. This is where he lives.
And I love that. That warms my heart when people come here, and like if I see, an Asian flying an American flag, I think, that's awesome. And people, yes, we can rally around that. But I think the same way I get in these debates with people, I say, look, if I went to Japan and I wanted to become a citizen there, I would be effing Japanese. I would learn Japanese, and I would respect their norms. And
100%.
But have you seen, or has your father seen the movie Salvador by Oliver Stone, perchance?
I don't think so.
There's a movie by Oliver Stone. It was one of his early movies, quite a good film with James Woods about the Civil War there. It's about a journalist who's there during the Civil War, which I had happened to read about actually through Chomsky. And then I got into because remember there were the nuns were killed there by I think the death squads or whatever the brutal dictator was, whoever. Yeah. So, that's how I know a little bit about that. But I agree with it. For the people who are already here, by the way, and you talked about it, 11, 15 million, whatever.
No, right.
I'd be very willing and happy to make a compromise with people such that we give them a path to citizenship.
Right.
For more border security, because look, they're not going anywhere. We should stop the charade. We're not going to deport these people who are here right now, especially who have children. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So let's invest in them, as you said, and then they will invest in us too, right? That's a reciprocal exchange. In exchange for E-Verify, tighter borders, and understanding, as you said, and I think we both agree here, it's like don't have to imperialize these communities.
Yes.
And you don't have to think that some rural area in Iowa is some disgusting bastion of racism because they like being white there,
Right.
And we see this now, and I guess are you white adjacent or are you white? I mean, I don't know, actually, right?
No, my mom's white. My dad's from Central America. So I'm half and half. I'm multi-ethnic in that way.
You're at least white adjacent. So maybe you believe this because you partake in white.
That's the whiteness coming out of it. That's the white side.
And that's just I'll end on this. I'll toss this to you too, and you can say what you think. But like that, if you want to fight Trumpism, and by that I mean the personality, that kind of trolling and that repugnant right-wing stuff, stop with the whiteness bullshit. Stop it. Stop. Stop. Denounce Kendi. Immediate. Just say, look, this guy is a clown. We don't agree with this. We don't agree with whiteness studies. We don't agree with abolish whiteness. It's just so regrettable because it makes white people. I am not a very warlike person. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not into that. But when I read that stuff, I'm like, you know what? F you. I'm going to promote white identity politics because you're being so stupid. And I don't want to do that.
It pulls that out of people that would never even think to.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it does the reverse effect of what they want it to do, which is my biggest problem with it.
Yeah, I agree. So it's like people just want to be in a community in Iowa. They go to church, they're all white, and they kind of like it, and they're just comfortable with it. And then they're being told that they're these white bigots, and they're just like, F you. And I see this because I'm right across the street from West Virginia, and it's very interesting because it's Trump country.
Yeah.
And I drive through the neighborhoods there that I really like, and the people are very nice there, and they're all flying Trump flags, and they you can tell they don't really pay attention to Trump the way I do. So I understand that they don't think he's quite so loathsome. But what they are is they're pissed that they're being told that they're the bigots, right?
Yeah.
They're just sick of it. They hate it, tired of it. Yeah, and I totally understand. Yeah. Okay, well, we agreed so much.
I know, right? I thought it was going to be more disagreement.
Maybe next time.
We're going to have to really find some things we disagree on.
Topics, yeah.